Dragons, my lord? The ancient man in robes remarked, fighting back the urge to laugh. No, not dragons, Melson. Dragon. One. The young king forcefully replied, poring over maps of the western lands. But, sire, there hasn't been a dragon spotted on the continent for almost 700 years. You cannot possibly believe this. Is tavern chatter? The king's hard eyes turned to the wizened advisor. Yes, I do believe. My father spent the better part of his life looking for something, anything, to support his claims that dragons still stalk the skies. The court, the people, how they laughed behind his back. The winged king, they called him. Hastened him to an early grave. While I still can, I'll hunt one down, kill it, and mount it in the Great Hall. My father will have found peace, and I'll have found a dragon. As desperately as they pled with him, neither the court, his advisors, nor his wife could sway him from his perceived mission. By the first light of dawn, he was gone, along with a fortnight's worth of supplies and the fastest horse in the royal stables. Tears fell from the queen's porcelain face as she stared off to the west. And you're absolutely sure? The young king questioned the squat, filthy man in the alleyway behind the inn. Aye, yes, sire. Saw it circling White Dagger Peak, I did. Just like the stories it was. Wings like a bat, but the size of it. Head like... it was like the prow of a ship. The fat man eyed the young king and his horse as he fingered his pouch of gold for services rendered. So... no guard with ye then? The king was packing his maps into the saddle of his steed and made no reply. You're telling me you're going off to find this beast? Alone? The man remarked incredulously. No, I'm not going to find it alone, the king said, mounting his horse with a flourish. I'm going to kill it alone. He rode off. White Dagger Peak, a tiny speck in the distance. Villagers, soldiers, even bandits by and large tended to give White Dagger Peak a wide berth when traveling. It was the quickest path between Orthenfell and Hostred, cutting a 5-day journey by more than half. But there were stories. As early as there had been settlers in its sharp shadow, White Dagger Peak had had a reputation for disappearances. An escaped horse wandered too close. A child playing deciding to climb on a dare. A family desperate for medicine in Orthenfell. All vanished without a trace. Nothing but the wind howling at night through the snowy peak to tell their tales. Years turned to decades, which groaned into centuries. The villages surrounding the peak were all but abandoned. An interesting place to find a king. Trotting through the ruins, the king scanned the area. Shells of dwellings and overgrown vines dotted the landscape. It was strangely quiet. No birds singing, no buzzing of insects, just the wind and the dust it kicked up. Making his way through the silent village, the king came to the foot of the peak. A fairly wide path had been cut into it from an eons-long one-sided battle with the elements. Wide enough for a rider and horse, but not both. They'd have to travel single file. Hours into the climb, tired and hungry, the king stared off into the distance at the dying light of the sun. It'd be black as pitch soon enough, and the terrain was hard enough to navigate at midday, let alone in the middle of the night. Frustrated but undeterred, the king built a fire, set up a tent, and, pulling a fat carrot out of his pack, fed his horse while tethering it to a large rock. As he set his head down to sleep, the wind began to pick up, but, steeling himself with thoughts of retribution and glory, he shut out the noise and drifted into a deep sleep. A freezing gust startled the king awake. Still groggy, he untied the flaps of the tent and pushed his way out into the world. He was met with the blinding light of morning on a mountainside. Rubbing his eyes and preparing himself for the day, he hoisted the saddle to his chest and walked over to... nothing. His horse was gone. He scoured the area, but to no avail. Nothing but hoofprints and a singed length of rope. Cursing and punching his knuckles bloody against the rock face, the king tried to think of his next move. He was at least 2 days on horseback to the nearest town, and without a horse, the distance was triple that. He had come this far. No point in turning back now. Gathering everything of use from his makeshift campsite, the king continued his trek up the peak. It was almost nightfall as he was nearing the summit. He had wrapped himself in every piece of cloth he had in his pack as the air grew thinner and the temperature plummeted. Gazing down through frost-covered eyes, the king could barely make out the ruins at the base. He was almost there. He could feel it. A foul stench struck him in the face as he reached a plateau. It smelled of rot and flames. Clearing the small rock formation and stepping out into the small, snow-capped clearing, the king held his torch aloft and took it all in. Bones. Everywhere. They were scattered all around in countless shapes and sizes. They would have blended into the snow, if not for the ash and scorch that was draped across the clearing like a thick blanket revealed in sharp contrast by the flickering of his torch. But something caught the king's eye in this slipshod graveyard. Something fresh. The leg of a large animal. It looked like it'd been torn from the body with unimaginable force. Gleaming on the skin of the bloody haunch was a gold brand. The same gold brand used by the royal stables. The king started to take a few steps forward to investigate, but stopped in his tracks as what little moonlight was blotted out by a large, ever-expanding shadow. Prepared for anything and willing to see his ancestors in the halls of glory, the king wheeled around, short sword drawn. His blind stab at the heart of whatever the darkness behind him was met with what felt like solid stone. The moment his sword connected, it was struck out of his hand by the reverberating force, sailed through the air, and disappeared through the clouds below the peak. Before the king could unsheath his dagger, an extension of the shape in front of him shot out and forced him to the ground. He could feel the wind being forced out of him. Darkness crept towards him from the sides of his eyes.
"Sorry, mate. Did I squeeze you a little too hard? I do that sometimes."
Instantly, the king felt the pressure lessen. Not enough to get up, but enough to breathe. Staring down at him, impossibly, was a dragon. "Who's there? Who spoke?" The beast above him squinted its saucer-sized eyes at its uninvited guest below.
"What, you stupid? I'm here. I spoke. Here's a change of pace. I asked the questions. Who's there? Who spoke?"
The beast emphasized each question with crushing force on the king's chest, making him slip in and out of consciousness. Taking deep, desperate gasps of air, the king managed to struggle out. "I'm King Drunway VI of the nation of—" He was cut off.
A king? Really? I've never met a king. What do you do?
Having never been asked that question during his entire reign as king, he fumbled over his words. "I rule, protect, and serve the people of my nation."
You rule them? Why's that? They all like you so much they decided you knew better than them? At everything?
Struggling to look intimidating while prone under a massive claw, the king replied, "No. My father was king, his father was king, and his father before him was king, and so on and so forth. I am king by divine right. God willed my ancient ancestors to rule, so they did, and they continue to do so, and will continue after I'm gone." The dragon scratched his chin with a talon the size of a bastard sword.
So, God made somebody king years and years ago, and just because you got squeezed out a right pair of legs, you get to be king too? Well, doesn't seem like the best system, to be honest.
Frustrated at being crushed and lectured, the king spoke. "And what would you suggest?" The dragon stared down at him, something approaching a smile across its face as it opened its dagger-filled jaws.
So glad you asked. More of a might makes right kind of bloke myself.
The screams tore through the tomb-like silence of the peak like sharp steel through parchment. Sitting on his makeshift throne of 6 large wagons secured together, the dragon spoke to the crowd.
Now, once I've eaten all of you,
he waved his large claw at half the occupants of the throne room,
then I'll decide if I'm hungry enough to eat all of you.
His ostrich egg-sized eyes flitted to the opposite half of the throne room. Panic started to ripple through the first half.
Now, let's not complicate things. I've paid my visits to every neighbouring kingdom on the continent. They know that you're under my protection, so we won't have any trouble from them, will we? No invasions, no war, and I scorched all their land and livestock, so we're the only game in town. Market cornered. But, like with everything in life, a price comes due. Your fellow citizens have elected you the first of many, many payments. So, if you stay put and don't squirm, it'll be easier on everyone involved.
The resignation in the eyes of the citizens was an answer in and of itself. An ancient man in flowing robes hobbled his way up the steep steps to the makeshift throne, motioned for the beast to lend his ear, and whispered something to it.
Oh yes, Melson, thank you for reminding me. The breeding houses are now operational. Should start seeing results in 9 months' time. Nothing but good news. But until then, I'll suffer through somehow. Cheers!
The citizens outside tried to ignore the screams and other wet noises that bled out of the castle. These sounds were soon to become as much a part of their daily lives as the singing of the birds, the rising of the sun, and the creaking of the large bronze emblem mounted atop the tallest tower that read, in jagged claw marks, "Property of the Winged King."